The London air was thick with anticipation as thousands of people lined the streets for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee celebration. Among the crowd stood Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, a decorated United States Marine who had traveled across the Atlantic to witness this historic moment. He wore his dress blue uniform with pride, the ribbons on his chest telling stories of courage from Afghanistan and Iraq. Marcus had always respected the British military. His grandfather had fought alongside British forces during World War II, sharing stories of their bravery and discipline. Now, standing just 50 feet from Buckingham Palace, he felt that same sense of honor his grandfather had described decades ago. The Royal Guard stood at attention along the palace gates, their red tunics and tall bearskin hats creating an impressive wall of tradition. Each guard remained perfectly still, eyes forward, rifles at their sides. They had been standing there for over 2 hours without moving a muscle, demonstrating the legendary discipline that made them famous worldwide. As Marcus watched, he noticed one particular guard who seemed different from the others. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with an air of quiet confidence that reminded Marcus of his own drill sergeants back at Quantico. This was Lance Corporal James Wellington, a veteran of 3 tours in Afghanistan, who had earned his position through exceptional service and unwavering dedication. The crowd began to surge forward as news spread that the Queen's carriage was approaching. People pushed and shoved, trying to get a better view of the historic procession. In the chaos, a small child became separated from her parents and began crying loudly as the crowd swept her toward the palace gates. Marcus immediately sprang into action. His military training kicked in as he moved through the crowd, protecting the child from being trampled while searching for her parents. The situation was becoming dangerous as more people pressed forward, unaware of the small girl caught in their midst. From his position at the palace gates, James Wellington noticed the commotion. He could see the American Marine working his way through the crowd, clearly trying to help someone in distress. The guard's trained eyes quickly assessed the situation and recognized the potential danger developing near the barriers. As Marcus finally reached the front of the crowd with the crying child in his arms, he found himself face to face with the Royal Guard. The barrier between them was only 3 feet wide, but it might as well have been an ocean. On one side stood an American Marine in full-dress uniform, holding a frightened child. On the other side stood a British Royal Guard, bound by centuries of tradition and strict orders never to break his post. The child continued to cry, calling for her mother in a voice that cut through the noise of the celebrating crowd. Marcus looked around desperately, trying to spot the parents while keeping the little girl safe from the pressing masses. The situation was becoming more critical by the minute as the crowd continued to grow and push forward. James Wellington faced an impossible choice. His orders were clear and absolute. Maintain position. Do not move. Do not speak. Do not break formation under any circumstances. These rules had been drilled into him through months of grueling training. Breaking his post would mean immediate disciplinary action and possible dismissal from the elite unit. But as he looked at the scared child and the American Marine trying to help her, James felt something deeper than duty stirring within him. His own daughter was about the same age as this little girl, and he knew how terrified she would be in this situation. The Marine's uniform told him this was a fellow soldier, someone who understood sacrifice and service. Marcus caught the guard's eye and saw something there that surprised him. Behind the stoic expression and rigid discipline, he glimpsed a father's concern and a soldier's understanding. Without speaking a word, Marcus held up the child slightly, hoping the guard might have seen her parents from his elevated position. The moment stretched between them like an eternity. 2 warriors from different nations, bound by different oaths, standing on opposite sides of a barrier that represented far more than just physical space. The crowd continued to surge around them, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding at the palace gates. James Wellington made a choice that would define not just his career, but his character as a human being. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he turned his head to the right and gave the slightest nod toward a section of the crowd about 20 feet away. There, a woman in a blue dress was frantically searching through the masses, calling out a name that matched what the little girl had been crying. Marcus understood immediately. Following the guard's subtle indication, he began moving toward the woman, still carrying the child, and using his body to shield her from the crowd. The relief on the mother's face when she saw her daughter was worth every risk Marcus had taken to help. As the reunion took place, Marcus turned back toward the guard who had helped him. James Wellington had returned to his rigid position, staring straight ahead as if nothing had happened. But for just a moment, their eyes met again, and both men shared an understanding that transcended uniforms, nations, and protocols. The Queen's carriage was now visible in the distance, and the crowd's excitement reached fever pitch. Marcus stepped back to allow the royal procession to pass. But he never forgot the quiet heroism he had witnessed. A guard had risked his career and reputation to help a child, asking for nothing in return except the knowledge that he had done the right thing. As the golden carriage passed by with its precious cargo, both men stood at attention in their own way. Marcus saluted as the Queen passed, while James Wellington maintained his ceremonial position with perhaps a little more pride than usual. The child, now safe in her mother's arms, waved happily at the beautiful horses and the splendid pageantry before her. Neither man spoke a word during the entire encounter, but a bond had been forged between them that would last forever. In a world often divided by politics and prejudice, two soldiers had found common ground in their shared commitment to protecting the innocent and doing what was right, regardless of the consequences. The crowd began to disperse as the procession moved on, but the impact of what had happened would ripple through both men's lives in ways they could never have imagined. 3 hours after the Queen's procession had ended, Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson sat in a small pub near Westminster, nursing a pint of bitter and replaying the events of the day in his mind. The image of the Royal Guard's subtle nod kept returning to him. That simple gesture had saved a child from potential harm and reunited her with her desperate mother. Marcus had seen courage in many forms during his military career, but there was something particularly powerful about what he had witnessed. The guard had risked everything to help a stranger, showing that true honor transcended rules and regulations. It was the kind of moment that reminded him why he had chosen to serve in the first place. Meanwhile, back at Wellington Barracks, Lance Corporal James Wellington was facing the consequences of his actions. Captain Morrison, his commanding officer, had received a report about the incident from a military photographer who had captured the moment on camera. The image clearly showed James breaking his rigid position to assist the American Marine. The captain's office was austere and intimidating, with portraits of former commanding officers staring down from the walls. James stood at attention, knowing his career hung in the balance. Captain Morrison studied the photograph for what seemed like an eternity before speaking. "Explain yourself, Wellington," the captain said, his voice cold and professional. "You broke protocol during one of the most important ceremonial events of the year. The Royal Guard's reputation depends on absolute discipline and unwavering adherence to orders." James remained silent, staring straight ahead as he had been trained to do. He knew that anything he said might make the situation worse. The military justice system was unforgiving when it came to breaches of duty, especially during high-profile events with international visibility. "Sir, I take full responsibility for my actions," James finally replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil he felt inside. "I was aware of my orders and chose to act in a way that I believed served a higher purpose." Captain Morrison's expression remained unchanged, but something in his eyes suggested he was weighing more than just military protocol. He had read James's service record earlier that afternoon and knew he was looking at one of his finest soldiers. 3 tours in Afghanistan, multiple commendations for bravery, and an unblemished record until this moment. "Do you understand that your actions could result in your dismissal from the Royal Guard?" the captain asked. "This unit has maintained its reputation for over 3 centuries. We do not break ranks for any reason, under any circumstances." "I understand, sir," James replied without hesitation. "But I also understand that a child was in danger, and a fellow service member needed assistance. Sometimes doing what's right requires accepting the consequences." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Captain Morrison's aide entered with an urgent message that had just arrived from the American embassy. The captain read it quickly, and for the first time that day, his stern expression softened slightly. "It seems your actions have attracted attention beyond our own chain of command," the captain said, handing James the letter. "The American Marine you assisted has written to commend your conduct. He's also requested permission to meet with you personally." James read the letter with growing amazement. Marcus had not only praised his assistance, but had also described how the guard's help had prevented what could have been a serious accident. The Marine had gone to considerable effort to track down James's identity and ensure his superiors knew about his character and quick thinking. What James didn't know was that Marcus had spent the entire afternoon investigating the incident. He had spoken to witnesses, reviewed footage from news cameras, and even interviewed the child's parents. His military background had taught him the importance of documentation and proper channels when reporting exceptional conduct. Marcus had also reached out to his own chain of command, requesting permission to formally recognize the British soldier's actions. The response from his commanding officer at Marine Corps Base Quantico had been immediate and supportive. The Corps understood the value of international military relationships and the importance of honoring Allied service members. 2 days later, an unprecedented meeting was arranged at the American Embassy. Captain Morrison accompanied James, while Marcus was joined by Colonel Stevens, the Marine attaché to the Court of St. James. The formal setting could not diminish the genuine respect that flowed between the 2 warriors who had shared that moment of crisis. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," James said as they shook hands for the first time, "I want you to know that what you did that day exemplified everything I admire about the American military. You saw someone in need and acted without hesitation." Marcus was struck by the guard's articulate manner and obvious intelligence. The stereotypical image of the silent, robotic ceremonial guard was shattered by this thoughtful, dedicated professional who clearly understood the weight of his responsibilities. "Lance Corporal Wellington," Marcus replied, "what you did took more courage than anything I've seen in combat. You risked your entire career to help a child you'd never met. That's the kind of character that makes both our services stronger." The conversation that followed revealed remarkable similarities between their backgrounds. Both men came from military families, both had deployed multiple times to Afghanistan, and both shared a deep commitment to service that went beyond personal ambition. They discovered that they had been in the same province in Afghanistan at the same time, possibly even supporting the same operations without knowing it. Colonel Stevens observed the interaction with interest. In his 25 years of service, he had rarely seen such immediate mutual respect between service members from different nations. The bond between these 2 men represented the best of military partnership and shared values. Captain Morrison found himself reassessing his initial judgment of James's actions. Watching his subordinate interact with the American Marine, he saw not just a soldier who had broken protocol, but a leader who had made a split-second decision based on values that transcended regulations. The photograph that had initially seemed like evidence of misconduct now looked like documentation of character under pressure. The meeting concluded with an exchange of unit coins and contact information. Both men expressed interest in staying connected, recognizing that they had found something rare in military service, a true peer who understood the complexities of modern warfare and the timeless values of honor and courage. As they prepared to leave, Marcus made an unexpected request. He asked for permission to attend the next changing of the guard ceremony, specifically to observe James's unit in action. He wanted to understand better the traditions and discipline that had shaped the man who had risked everything to help a stranger. The request was granted, and arrangements were made for a private viewing from inside the palace gates. For Marcus, it would be an opportunity to see military precision at its finest. For James, it would be a chance to demonstrate the standards and traditions that had initially seemed to conflict with his moment of humanity, but which actually provided the foundation for his moral courage. 1 week after their meeting at the American Embassy, Marcus stood in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace watching the changing of the guard ceremony from a privileged position behind the ceremonial lines. Captain Morrison had arranged for him to observe the precision and pageantry that defined the Royal Guard's daily routine. The ceremony began with the sound of military bands playing traditional marches that had echoed through these same stones for generations. Marcus watched with professional appreciation as the guards moved with mechanical precision, their every step calculated and rehearsed to perfection. He could see James among the ranks, indistinguishable from his colleagues in bearing and discipline. What struck Marcus most powerfully was the realization that the same rigid training that had initially seemed to conflict with James's moment of humanity had actually made it possible. The guard's ability to assess a situation quickly, make a critical decision under pressure, and execute it flawlessly while maintaining his primary responsibilities came directly from his military conditioning. As the ceremony concluded, Captain Morrison approached Marcus with an unexpected proposition. The British Army was developing a new training exchange program with Allied forces, and they wanted the American Marine to consider participating as an instructor. The captain explained that James's conduct during the Diamond Jubilee had sparked discussions about balancing rigid discipline with adaptive thinking. "Your interaction with Lance Corporal Wellington has highlighted something important," Captain Morrison explained. "We need soldiers who can think beyond their immediate orders while still maintaining the highest standards of discipline. You've shown us that it's possible to honor tradition while embracing the human element that makes military service meaningful." Marcus was intrigued by the proposal, but knew he would need approval from his own chain of command. The idea of working with British forces to develop new training methodologies appealed to his sense of innovation and international cooperation. He also recognized that such a program could strengthen the bonds between Allied militaries. Meanwhile, James was experiencing his own unexpected developments. Far from being disciplined for his actions during the Queen's procession, he found himself selected for a special assignment with the British Army's Public Affairs Division. His superiors wanted him to help develop guidelines for ceremonial guards when faced with emergency situations. The irony was not lost on James that his moment of rule-breaking had actually enhanced his career prospects. The military leadership had recognized that modern ceremonial duties required guards who could think independently while maintaining their essential function as symbols of tradition and discipline. The story of the silent standoff between the Marine and the Royal Guard had begun to spread through military circles on both sides of the Atlantic. Social media had amplified the tale, with the photograph of their moment of mutual assistance becoming a symbol of international military cooperation and shared values. A military journalist from Stars and Stripes reached out to both men for an interview about their experience. The resulting article, titled "When Duty Meets Humanity," was picked up by major news outlets and sparked discussions about the evolving role of military traditions in modern society. The article described how two warriors from different nations had found common ground in their commitment to protecting the innocent. It highlighted the fact that their encounter had taken place during one of Britain's most important ceremonial events, yet neither man had compromised their essential duties while helping a child in distress. Readers responded powerfully to the story, with veterans from multiple countries sharing their own experiences of moments when military training and human compassion had intersected. The comment sections became forums for discussions about the values that unite service members regardless of nationality or branch of service. 6 months later, the training exchange program that Captain Morrison had proposed became reality. Marcus found himself stationed at Sandhurst for a 3-month assignment, working with British officers to develop scenarios that tested both disciplinary adherence and adaptive thinking. The program's success exceeded all expectations. British and American service members worked together to create training exercises that challenged soldiers to maintain their core responsibilities while responding to unexpected humanitarian situations. The scenarios they developed were eventually adopted by NATO forces throughout Europe. James, meanwhile, had been promoted to corporal and was leading a team that traveled to military bases throughout the United Kingdom, sharing lessons learned from the Diamond Jubilee incident. His presentations emphasized that true military excellence required both unwavering discipline and the moral courage to act when circumstances demanded it. The two men remained in regular contact, their friendship deepened by their shared understanding of military service and sacrifice. They exchanged stories about their families, their deployments, and their hopes for the future of international military cooperation. A year after their first meeting, both men found themselves back at Buckingham Palace for another royal ceremony. This time they stood together as honored guests, representatives of a new model of military partnership that emphasized shared values over rigid protocols. As they watched the changing of the guard ceremony, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that moment of crisis during the Diamond Jubilee. A simple act of assistance between strangers had evolved into a lasting friendship and a new approach to military training that was being implemented across 2 continents. James watched his former colleagues perform their ceremonial duties with the same precision and pride he remembered from his own time in the ranks. But now he understood that the highest expression of military discipline was not blind obedience to rules, but the wisdom to know when human needs transcended institutional requirements. The ceremony concluded with the traditional playing of the national anthems. As the music filled the courtyard, both men stood at attention, honoring their respective flags and the values they represented. They had learned that true patriotism and military excellence were enhanced, not diminished, by recognizing the common humanity that connected all people. Their story had become more than just an account of 2 soldiers helping a child. It had evolved into a testament to the power of individual character to influence institutional change and the importance of maintaining human connections in an increasingly divided world. As they walked away from the palace together, discussing plans for the next phase of their training exchange program, both men knew they had been part of something larger than themselves. They had demonstrated that the highest military virtues were not just about following orders, but about making choices that honored both duty and humanity. The silent standoff that had left everyone speechless had become a conversation that would continue for generations, inspiring service members to find the courage to do what was right, regardless of the rules that might try to prevent them from acting with compassion and wisdom.